So today we're going to start talking about basically how society went from everything being fantastic in the 1920s to being absolutely garbage in the 1930s, and it happened really quick. All right. So here's what's going to happen. Make me a little smaller. Move me over here. All right. So this is a sign. Very quickly. So we've been talking about the 1920s being absolutely fantastic. Very quickly, signs like these pop up saying, hey, those out of work, don't even come to our town. We don't even have enough jobs for people in our town. Just keep on going. So we're going to talk about today how that happened so quickly at the end of the 1920s. All right. So there were some long-term warning signs that there was some issues. Some of the big industries had been struggling, like railroads, textiles, steel, coal, the building of houses. These big backbone industries had actually not been doing great in the 1920s, but there were so many like small startup businesses that were doing really good that it kind of made people turn a blind eye that some of the big industries that are needed if stuff really does shut down happen, that they'll be needed. It makes people kind of ignore those. Farmers are struggling. So if you remember back to the populist time period, a unique situation in America is that farmers make too much food. So they kind of figured this out with the Grange, with supply and demand. Don't make too much or you'll put yourself out of business, as counterintuitive as that sounds. What happens in World War I is that the rest of the world desperately needed food. So all our farmers started mass producing. They started mass producing as much as possible, and they were feeding the entire world. Farmers were making bank in World War I. American farmers were, because we were feeding the entire world, and they owe us a whole bunch of money afterwards. The problem becomes the fact that in order to mass produce all this food, the farmers were growing on all three crops. They weren't doing a crop rotation system, which was problematic to do that long term. Farmers also during World War I liked how much money that they were making. They tried to continue making the same amount of money after World War I by doing the same thing and continuously mass producing stuff. They shouldn't do this. So they were back in the same situation that was happening in the late 1800s, is they're making too much food and they're almost putting themselves out of business. And this is happening again in the 1920s. The farmers were used to making a lot of food during World War I and getting paid for it. Now they're making the same amount of food and there's not as big of a market for it. So they're about to put themselves out of business again. That, on top of the fact that they are not doing a crop rotation system, is going to really come back to bite them here in the 1930s. Farmers wanted this thing called price supports, basically where the government comes in and gives a minimum amount that you can sell things for, like a minimum amount that you could sell an ear of corn for like a dime instead of like selling it for 2 cents. The government's usually not a big supporter of coming in and regulating private industries at this point. People are living on credit. We had mentioned this yesterday. When you buy things, you can take it home now and make payments on it. People actually own very little, but what they do is they have a bunch of stuff. They own very little, but they have a bunch of stuff and they're just making payments on it, which is fine as long as you're making payments on it. And then another thing here, an uneven distribution of income. While that's troubling in our society, in a laissez-faire market economy capitalism, that's just going to be a thing that always exists. So while the haves and have-nots, there's a huge gap between the haves and have-nots in society. In American society, that's just a thing that's going to exist. And one of the reasons that other countries like communist Russia look down on us is the fact that we allow this income inequality to exist in America. But based on the American dream and our ideals, that's a negative aspect of American society with the uneven distribution of income. But generally speaking, most Americans, even to the present day, it's ends justify the means. Maybe that's not the right term. That's a necessary evil to have all the positives in society. The uneven distribution of income is something that generally has always existed in the United States because of a laissez-faire capitalistic economy. All right, so the election in 1928. Again, everything was fantastic in 1920, 1924. The Roaring Twenties are fantastic. One of the reasons Calvin Coolidge doesn't run for president again in 1928, again, he took over for Harding when he died in 23, became president himself in 24. In 1928, he absolutely could run for president again, but it was just too boring. It wasn't fun. Why do that? So he just kind of shuts it down. So in 1928, hey, who are we going to pick? All right. They're going to pick a guy named Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover is the equivalent to today as like a billionaire. Maybe not that rich. He's one of the, I believe off the top of my head, he's by far the richest president we'd ever had to that point. He was a millionaire. So he's a super rich business guy. I mean, why not? And he's a Republican, so everything was good in the 1920s with Republicans. Let's pick another Republican. Everything's going good. Why mess with what works? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Go with another Republican. This guy's a wealthy business guy. Businesses are good. He just seems like a logical choice to come in 1928. He runs against a guy named Alfred Smith, who's the Democrat, who's a great people person. He was a very likable person. However, the fact that Herbert Hoover was a Republican, he was also known for some of the stuff he did in World War I politically, like the Victory Gardens and stuff. That was his idea. And he worked under Harding and Coolidge in the Roaring Twenties. He has a very, very horror movie-esque statement when he takes office in his inaugural speech. He says, "We in America are nearer to the final triumph over poverty than ever before." Actually, I think I have a video clip of that. Give me 1 second. This is Alfred Smith, the guy that lost. This here on the right, look, you lost. I'm going to be over your face. This right here is Herbert Hoover. That's who the president's going to be in 1928. Doesn't seem to be any issue for why he would be the president. Everything's good. All right, let's see. I think I got a video clip right here. As I said, I have a video clip.
In 1928, on the campaign promise of continuing prosperity and a chicken in every pot, Herbert Hoover accepted the Republican Party's nomination to run for president. He declared that the United States of America was nearer to the final triumph over poverty than ever before in its history. He predicted, "We shall soon, with the help of God, be in sight of the day when poverty will be banished from this land." Yet shortly after his election, the United States economy crumbled. Banks closed. Millions of people became jobless, homeless, and hopeless during the Great Depression.
So when he's like, guys, this whole being poor thing, that's going to be a thing of the past. That's the equivalent in a horror movie of saying, I'm going to be right back. It don't work out well for you. So it was kind of infamous that he says that, and then the entire economy just collapses. Now, I want to say before we get in on this, the entire economy, the president has very little control over the economy, if any at all. However, typically when the economy is really good, the president gets the positive reinforcements of that. And when the economy tanks, somebody has to take the blame for it. And it's almost always the president. So the economy is going to absolutely just nosedive while Hoover is president. He didn't cause it. As presidents don't typically cause economic collapses. They also don't usually have a whole lot of ability to fix them either. But Herbert Hoover takes all the blame for this, and he is going to be one of the most hated presidents we've ever had while they're president because of the way he's going to handle this situation. Oh, we already watched that. Don't do that. All right. So this is just a picture. At this point, there's some video, as you just saw. There are videos, but those videos you would see in movie theaters, which are becoming really popular at the time. So in the previews of a movie theater is where you would go and see those newsreels and stuff like that, because people aren't going to have televisions until about the 1950s, and today we're going to be about 1929. All right. So The stock market. All right. So the Spark Notes used to be called Cliff Notes. I don't know why they're called Spark Notes now for you guys. Here's the real short version of what's getting ready to happen so you know what I'm building up to. The stock market is going to collapse, just like poof, gone. All right, it's going to crash. The term crash is not even a term that's ever been used before this. The stock market's gone up, it's gone down. Oh my gosh, it's a recession. The term the stock market crash is going to be a whole new term that gets used in the Great Depression. All right. So here's what happens. And I need to explain to you what the stock market is. So you don't have to be a super advanced person to understand the stock market, but sometimes either it makes a lot of sense to you and it's real simple, or it's really confusing. Either way, I'm going to try to simplify and explain it to you what it is and how it works. If you're trying your hardest and you still don't quite understand, you can still survive in American history not fully understanding the idiosyncrasies of the stock market, but it will make it a lot more simpler. Great word itself. It will make it a lot easier to understand if you do. All right. So here's what the stock market is. Say you have a business. And you know what? We're going to use a ridiculous business because a ridiculous business in the 1920s made money. Everything in the 1920s made money. We're going to say Billy. All right. Billy, he's going to make a company. He's going to make poopy flavored lollipops. All right. Nobody should ever buy a poopy flavored lollipop because that seems like the worst idea ever in a company. But that's what Billy's going to do, and he's going to do it in the 1920s. And guess what? Billy's going to make bank. Everybody makes bank. So here's what Billy does. So once his company starts making good money, people buy his poopy flavored lollipops. He's making as many as he possibly can. His little factory, he makes 10,000 poopy flavored lollipops a day, and people are buying them. All right. So what he wants to do is he wants to make his company bigger. So what he does is he goes to the stock market, and he's going to make his company of poopy flavored lollipops, which is a real company with a real factory. He is going to sell parts of his company to random people. They're called investors, people that want to buy stocks. Say his company is worth $100,000. All right. He is going to divide up his company into 100 pieces. So if you buy a stock and one stock represents one piece of that company, if you buy that stock, you would buy it for about $1,000. All right. Since you bought one of the 100 pieces that he has, you literally own 1% of his company. All right. If you happen to buy more than 51 shares or more than 50 shares, all right, since there's only 100, if you bought 51% of his company, you would now own Billy's company and you can fire Billy. So Billy's literally selling his company, all right? So here's why Billy's going to do that. So Billy will sell you a piece of his company, all right, and you give him $1,000. So he's giving you a stock, literally a piece of paper that says you own 1% of his company. You have given him $1,000, all right? And depending on the price and all that, depends on the company. The idea is that you're going to take that $1,000 if you're Billy, and you're going to build something else that's going to make you more money. 40 people buy stock, so they give you $40,000. You take that $40,000 and you build another building next to your poopy flavored lollipop building, and you can quadruple the output. So instead of now making 10,000 poopy flavored lollipops, you now make 30,000 poopy flavored lollipops, and they all sell out, and you're making more money. Your company is now worth $300,000. If you had bought a stock from Billy when it was only worth $1,000 and now it has tripled in value, you now have a piece of paper that you paid $1,000 for that is now worth $3,000. And at any point, you can go back to Billy and give him that share back. All right. And he's required by law to buy it back from you, and you get $3,000. You've never had to try one of these poo-poo flavored lollipops, but when his company does well, you sell it back, you make money. That's how the stock market works, all right? Typically, you don't want to invest in something like a poopy flavored lollipop company because while you can make money in the stock market, if everybody's like, hey, that's an awful business, and he goes out of business, you have 1% share of something that's worthless. So you spend $1,000 and have this piece of paper here, but it might be worthless now. So there is a risk in investing in the stock market. In the 1920s, though, there were no risk in the stock market, right? And the reason that there is no risk in the stock market is because everything made money in the 1920s, all right? So, let me get to where I am. So the Dow Jones Industrial Average for the stock market, and I'm going to go back before I jump ahead and change tune here. I'm going to explain why this is important to understand this, because the story is really cool, all right? So the Dow Jones Industrial Average, we still use that today. It measures the stock market's health, pretty much what the general feeling of the stock market is. How much money is in the stock market on a given day? It goes up and it goes down, but the stock market basically is usually indicative of how good the society is going. So typically the stock market isn't doing great when the society is down, and when society is down, the stock market doesn't do well. So the stock market is kind of like a thermometer of how well the United States economy is doing. All right. So the Dow Jones Industrial Average reached a high of 381, 300 points higher than 5 years before. And it was a bull market. So a bull market is when the stock market's going up and it keeps making more money, and the bear market's when it goes down. The 1920s was nothing but a rising market. Now, I also need to explain as we get started here talking about the stock market. This is getting ready to get really bad, and everybody's about to lose everything, and we're like one step from being cannibals in the 1930s. Like it's bad, all right? In present context, with the whole coronavirus thing, the stock market is not doing good. Do not correlate the two. A whole bunch of crazy stuff that's going to happen that's going to cause the Great Depression, that by the end of the Great Depression, they changed the laws on the stock market to make sure the same thing couldn't happen again. So as I start telling you all these horror stories about what happens when the stock market goes down, don't panic and start correlating that with present day, because it's not the same. The way the Great Depression is getting ready to happen, all right, and it's a doozy. They have effectively gone through and made sure that we can't have another depression the same way. All right. The stock market isn't going to collapse and take everybody with them like it did in the 1929s. Ooh, spoiler alert. My bad. All right. So bull market's a rising market. Here's an important one. All right. For those of you that are like trying to figure this out, how it makes it. 4 million Americans were involved in the stock market. At the time, we had about 100 million Americans in the country. 4%. 4% were in the stock market. So how in the world does 4% of the people in the stock market like shut down America? That's what we're getting ready to talk about. All right. So keep in mind, these people that are in the stock market are making bank. So if you invested in Billy's poo-poo flavored lollipop company, all right, and you bought a $1,000 share, 3 days later, it's worth $3,000. You know what's better than $3,000? $10,000. So what people would do, and this is going to lead us to our next thing, is speculation. So people that invested in the stock market did so very aggressively because you couldn't lose money. So if you invested in Billy's Poo Poo Flavor Lollipop Company and you made $10,000, sure, you have at any point you can go to Billy and give him your stocks and you can have $10,000. But nobody did that. Nobody went through and sold stocks in the 1920s because that seemed to be silly. You know why? Because if you just left your stocks in there, it's going to keep making money. That $10,000 is going to turn into $25,000. It's going to turn into $100,000. People were millionaires in the stock market on paper. In theory, they should be able to take their money whenever they want to and go sell it back to the company and get all their money out and go be gazillionaires. Say you had $5 million in the stock market in the 1920s. You are super rich. Do you actually have any cash though? No, because it's all in the stock market. Again, it's only 4% of the population. But, so there's only a small percentage that are in the stock market. Nobody cashed out because you know what's better than having $10 million? $15 million. So speculation is this very aggressive way of trading, and it's what people did in the 1920s. Very dangerous to do because if something bad happens, because people would put all their money into one company. That's bad. If that company goes out of business, you lose everything. People were very risky with their money in the 1920s because nothing bad happened. All right. And then this is the big mamma jamma that seems boring, but this is going to be the thing that's going to absolutely drive a hammer who drives a hammer in anything? I don't know where that analogy was going. It's absolutely going to destroy the economy. It's buying on margin. So you know who loves money? Banks. Banks love money. Do you know how banks make money? You may have never thought about this. So what happens is when you get a paycheck, all right, and we're going to use Sally. We're going to use Sally as an example, all right? If I was in class, I'd start calling on you individually and putting you all in this story, but I'm not going to. So Sally works full-time, and we'll say she works at McDonald's. She's a shift manager. She works full-time, all right? So Sally works really, really hard. She's never heard of the stock market, all right? But all she knows is when she gets paid, she's going to take her check, all right? And she's going to go to the bank, and she's going to put it in the bank. Here's what the bank does with Sally's money. When you, and this is still how it is today, when you go put your money in a bank, they don't go put it in a special little box for you waiting for you to come back. The bank does know exactly how much you put in and how much you can get out. Like, they keep very good records. But what they do is when they take your money or they take Sally's money and she hands it to them, all right, and put it in her account, like, okay, and they just chuck it over their shoulder to a big old pile of money in the back, all right? So they know exactly how much money Sally has put in, but this is not being kept in a certain box for her. About 90% of the money that banks get, all right, they're going to give away to other people. So whose money are they giving away? They're giving away your money, and they're giving away Sally's money, all right? So they're giving away other people's money to people who want to go buy houses and buy cars. So if you go to the bank and you're like, hey, bank, can I have a loan? Banks will be like, sure. Here's $100,000 for you to go buy a house. But what do you have to do? You have to pay it back plus interest. So the banks loan you somebody else's money. Then you pay it back plus interest. Banks get to keep the interest. That is their money. All right. So this is why when banks like try to charge you overcharge fees and stuff, generally speaking, they're making bank off of selling other people's money to other people. And banks really shouldn't charge like checking account fees and stuff, in my opinion. But what do I know? I didn't think the coronavirus is going to be a big deal because I'm an idiot. All right. So that is how banks work. Banks love money, and they love easy money. When banks see everybody is making money in the stock market in the 1920s, they do something that is extremely illegal today, but nobody had realized it could be a problem. Banks are taking people's money, like Sally's money, all right, who had been putting it in the bank. Sally's never heard of the stock market. They take Sally's money and the average American's money, and they start investing it in the stock market. So here's what it's called: buying on margin. Say you want to buy $1,000 stock in the stock market. You're one of that 4% that invest in the stock market. But for whatever reason, you've only got $100. The bank back in the 1920s would loan you 90% of the cost of a share. So if you had $100, the bank will give you the other $900 so that you could go buy that share. Well, how does that benefit the bank? Well, since everybody made money in the 1920s, once you made a big profit off of that, the bank wants that $900 back plus interest, right? So the banks were making tons of money off the stock market by loaning it to people to invest in the stock market. That's crazy dangerous, and we know that now because of what's getting ready to happen. So all these people in America who had never heard of the stock market, all right, had their money, if it was in a bank, the banks had invested everybody's money into the stock market. So while it looks like only 4% of the people had invested in the stock market, you know how many people had actually invested in the stock market? Like every single person that had money in a bank almost. So this is going to be extremely dangerous, and junk's going to hit the fan real quick here. All right, so buying on margin was this idea that the banks would loan people money so they can invest into the stock market so the banks can make more money. So this is the 1920s. You see the numbers down here at the bottom. Hopefully, sometimes it cuts off on this. If you can't see it, this line here is 1922. This line here is 1923. This is 1924, 25, 26, 27, 28, and 29. This is the Dow Jones Industrial Averages, the amount of money going up and up and up and up. The main thing you need to see here is that for the 1920s, it just goes up and 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 up. All right, everything's great.